Arthurian literature has affected the European heroic ideal profoundly, perhaps even as much as classical texts. Yet while everyone knows that Achilles is written of in the Iliad, few have heard of Chretien de Troyes' 5 romances, which gave birth to the genre of Arthurian literature. Chretien was a French writer who lived in the early 12th century. He served in royal courts and received patronage for his works from Marie of France, daughter of King Louis VII and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Before Chretien, Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote about Arthur as a military leader and about Merlin as his prophetic advisor. And we have a few other sources and authors who mention Arthurian characters. But with Chretien, Arthurian legend takes on recognizable form for the first time. In Chretien's 5 romances, the ideas of romance as we know it and of chivalry appear for the first time as integral elements of Arthurian legend, and Arthur appears for the first time as the king of a court of great knights, such as Lancelot, to whom we have no previous literary references. It is unclear exactly what sources Chretien is making use of aside from Geoffrey, and where he is getting many of his names, but it is clear that he is making use of, in part, older Celtic and Welsh folk traditions. Giants, dwarves, fairies, and supernatural beings and occurrences appear frequently in Chretien's romances, and his writings are saturated with pagan themes and motifs. And this is also the case in other works of Arthurian literature, but Chretien's 5 romances, which would serve as the foundation of all Arthurian literature which followed, are most grounded in the mystical world and the heroic values of pagan Europe. And this is why I find his writings, in particular, so remarkable and enchanting. I believe that they represent an important development in the European heroic ideal. His writings emphasize the ideas of romance, beauty, and chivalry, which were already present in the writings of the Greeks and Norse, but are most fully elaborated upon and explored by Chretien. The idea of the Greek aristos, excellence, and nobility is the centerpiece of Chretien's romances. The knights compete to be the best in the realm of combat and martial prowess, but also in the realms of love and beauty. The beauty and fairness of the knights is often emphasized, as well as how desired they are by maidens and ladies. In the world of Arthurian romance, one cannot be the best knight without also being the most beautiful. This idea, of course, was present in antiquity with the Greeks in the idea of the kalos kai agathos, the beautiful and the good, which referred to the aristocracy, to the aristos. The youthfulness and sometimes almost feminine beauty of Greek heroes was often emphasized in their literature. Beauty, heroism, and nobility were inseparable. All were contained within the idea of the Greek hero. But in Chretien's romances, and in Arthurian literature in general, beauty is emphasized even more than in classical texts. In the world of Arthur, one can tell the nobility and prowess of a knight simply by his beauty, and knights readily devote themselves to the service of ladies for the sake of their beauty simply upon seeing them. Beauty is treated as something which is inherently good and inherently godly. In Chretien's texts, goodness and divinity are inseparable from beauty, and wickedness and evil are inseparable from ugliness. And this is a very pagan conception of good and evil. And it is actually the origin of Nietzsche's critique of Christianity. As Nietzsche points out in Genealogy of Morals, the original meaning of all Indo-European words which we have for evil referred to the peasantry, to the base, to the lowly, the ugly, and the crude. And all of the words for the good referred to the beautiful, noble, upright, aristocracy. And of course the word aristocracy comes from aristos, which meant precisely these qualities. The chivalric ideal at the heart of Arthurian romance is the same heroic ideal seen in the writings of the Greeks and the Norse, simply with more emphasis on what we call romance. This is a world in which beauty is inherently valued as one of the highest virtues, but beauty is nothing without the heroic virtue, which it is intimately connected with. And the idea of romantic love, or at least its precursor, was certainly present in Greek and Norse literature. Penelope waits years for Odysseus' return, and Odysseus stays up on the beach when he is trapped on Calypso's island, crying and longing to be at home with his love. Jason and Medea have a passionate romance, and she runs away with him, though it of course ends poorly. Passionate love was a key element of the European heroic ideal long before Christianity, but it was not the centerpiece. So what we're seeing in Chretien's depiction of chivalry is not so much Christian virtue, but European heroic virtues with an emphasis on love or romance due to Christianity's influence, since Christianity, of course, holds love as God. And this romantic emphasis is what distinguishes the idea of chivalry from the classical heroic ideal. But it is only in the medieval chivalric ideal that romance is elevated to be equally as important as heroism in the knight. And I believe that the idea of romance is an extremely important development in the heroic ideal. Romance is the heroic view of love and of gender relations, and the ideas of chivalry and romance are important in preventing the heroic ideal from becoming purely He-Man masculinity worship like the modern manosphere. Even the Spartans, perhaps the most austerely militaristic and masculine warrior society in the history of the West, highly valued their women, so much so that the Athenians called them crazy for the freedom and influence which their women held. And although Athenian society seems to have been fairly restrictive on their women, in their literature, perhaps because it was inherited from an older time, women are often depicted as heroic, virtuous, and fearsome. The same is true of Norse literature. An essential part of the heroic ideal is the relationship between the sexes viewed through a heroic light, gender roles viewed through a heroic, life-affirming light. And this is why, while some claim that the idea of romance comes from Christian influence, I believe it is more accurately described as a pagan heroic conception, which was brought to the forefront in Arthurian literature by Christianity's emphasis on love. Nowhere in the New Testament does Christ talk about the rules of chivalric courtship or winning the love of beautiful maidens through heroic feats. Nowhere does he talk about dying for the sake of a lover, a friend, or for honor. The love of the New Testament is quite different, and the later Arthurian texts, which espouse the virtues of the New Testament, condemn Lancelot for his love affair with Guinevere. They condemn him for not being a virgin, and for fighting for the sake of glory and love rather than the sake of God, for in this way being selfish rather than selfless. The love which Christ espouses in the New Testament is agape, an all-encompassing, selfless love, not romantic passion. But I'm not some sort of anti-Christian zealot either. When I attack Christianity, it is because of what I perceive to be its detrimental or subversive effects, such as the condemnation of Lancelot as a sinner. My commitment is to the heroic worldview, and when that worldview takes on Christian flavor and puts Christ at its head, as in Chretien's 5 romances, I fully support it, and the medieval Christian emphasis on love and passion was certainly important for bringing out, expanding upon, and solidifying the pagan idea of romance, just as the Greeks did with the idea of heroism. And it is my highest hope that this heroic worldview, and the literature and history which birthed it, can form the basis of a new, yet ancient civilizational project on the same scale as the biblical one. In the heroic tradition, I see a solution to modernity. I see a history, a value system, an understanding of life and nature, and I see a goal in the future. I see the Superman.
To gain access to the ARC's exclusive community or donate, check the links in the description. Thank you for your patronage. It makes this channel possible.